Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala. ippaṛi tappuṉai yēṉiṉaipittāy yiṇiyār viḍuvār Arunachala. Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala.
That was Sadhuam singing verse 5 of Śrī Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, which is the verse that I am going to be talking about today. What Bhagavan says in this fifth verse is, i-p-paṛi tappuṉai yēṉiṇaipittāy yiṇiyār viḍuvā Arunachala. That is, there are three sentences. i-p-paṛi tappu means escape this blame. uṉai yēṉiṇaipittāy, why did you make me think of you? yiṇiyār viḍuvā, now who will leave? The first sentence, he says, escape this blame, i-p-paṛi. The blame he's referring to, paṛi means blame, censure, condemnation, ridicule. That is the blame that he spoke about in the previous verse. In the previous verse, he said, he was Arukavene Andane, Ahatridil, Akilam Baritidum Arunachala. That means, for whom did you take charge of me? If you now reject or expel or banish or abandon me, the whole world will blame you or ridicule or revile you. So that is the blame that Bhagavan is referring to here. He says, escape this blame. Arunachala would deserve such blame or condemnation or ridicule only if he were to reject, expel, banish, or abandon any of his devotees. So he can escape this blame only by never rejecting or abandoning any of them, no matter how unworthy they may be. Therefore, i-p-paṛi tappu, escape this blame, is a prayer that implies, do not reject or abandon me, but instead complete the task you have begun of taking charge of me by eradicating this ego and thereby restoring me to my natural state of absolute and inseparable oneness with you. It also implies that for the same reason, he should never reject or abandon any of his devotees. So in this verse, Bhagavan is praying on behalf of all of us, but Arunachala should never leave his divine task of eradicating ego. He should never leave his divine task of eradicating ego incomplete by rejecting any of us as unworthy of his grace. So though this is a love prayer between Bhagavan and Arunachala, indirectly Bhagavan is praying on behalf of all of us in this verse, that Arunachala should never abandon us. Of course, Arunachala will never abandon us, but we have to, as devotees, we have to be aware of how dependent we are on his grace. So that is why this prayer. So this task, this aruṇācalā, as Bhagavan often referred to it, this a work of grace, or is something that Arunachala began from the very beginning of time. That is, time began when we rose as ego. So from the very moment we rose as ego, Arunachala, Arunachala by his very nature began his task of grace, drawing us back to him. Because such is his nature. But this is because of the outward going nature of ego, this is a very long process to slowly draw, he has to first allow ego to go out, experience, do so many things, experience the fruit of its actions, and only eventually the ego will slowly cease looking for happiness outside, will recognize that its search for happiness outside is futile. And it's at that moment that the real process of drawing us back to him begins. So Arunachala commenced the final stages of this process of grace, by making us think of him. Because it is by making us think of him that he begins to draw our outward running mind inwards. Prior to that, at every moment of waking and dream, we have been ceaselessly seeking happiness and satisfaction in things other than ourselves. So we began to seek them within ourselves only when he made us think of him. Therefore, if he did not intend to complete this task of taking charge of us entirely by eradicating ego, why did he make us think of him? As Bhagavan asks in the second sentence of this verse, uṇai yēṉiṇaipittāy, why did you make me think of you? I'll just explain this sentence. The uṇai is it's a poetic abbreviation of uṇai, which is the accusative singular form of the second person pronoun you. Ein is an interrogative pronoun that means why or for what. And niṇai is a verb that means to think, consider, ponder, remember, or meditate. And niṇaippittāy is a causative form of it. So it means to cause to think or to make think. Niṇaippittāy is a second person singular past tense form of that verb, niṇaippittāy. So it means you caused to think. And in this case, it implies you made me think. Me is not there, but it's implied there. So Bhagavan is asking Arunachala, why did you make me think of you? As always, thinking of Arunachala can be understood and interpreted at two levels. At the surface level, it means thinking of his name and form, while at a deeper level, it means thinking of or meditating on his real form, his real nature, Swarupa. His name and form is Namarupa. His real form is Swarupa. That's his real nature. And his real nature is the real nature of ourself, is Atma-swarupa. That Arunachala is our own Swarupa, our own real nature, appearing outwardly in name and form in order to turn our attention back within. So that the Swarupa of Arunachala is our own Swarupa, Atma-swarupa, and that Atma-swarupa is our fundamental awareness, which is always shining within us as I am. That is Satchit, our fundamental awareness of our own existence. That is the true form of Arunachala. So either thinking of the name and form of Arunachala or thinking of I am alone, both are thinking of Arunachala. It's just two ways of understanding what is meant by thinking of Arunachala. Both these interpretations are correct. Because as I explained earlier when I was discussing the meaning of the first verse, interpreting thinking of Arunachala to mean thinking of his name and form is appropriate for those who at present are more drawn to Anyabhava. Anyabhava means the devotional attitude or idea, bhava, but God is anya, something other than oneself. And having such an attitude, that is the preliminary stage of the path of self-surrender or bhakti. That is, we first begin with an idea God is something other than us, something out there. And we long to know and to give ourselves to God. So the bhakti marga begins with Anyabhava. But that Anyabhava will eventually mature into Ananyabhava. Ananya means what is not other. So Ananyabhava is the devotion to God as something not other than oneself. In other words, devotion to him as oneself alone. So this thinking of Arunachala to me in being self-attentive, which is thinking of or meditating on the swarupa of Arunachala, is appropriate for those who are more drawn to this ananya bhava, the understanding or recognition that God is not something other than ourselves, which is what prompts us to follow the path of self-investigation or jnana. That is, once we understand that God is not other than ourselves, on what should we meditate? We should meditate on ourselves alone. Meditating on ourselves, that is self-investigation. And that is the more advanced stage of the path of self-surrender and bhakti, as Bhagavan implies in verse 8 of Upadesha Undiyā. What he says in verse 8 of Upadesha Undiyā is, Anya bhavatin abanahamaham ananya bhavame undipara anatinam uttamam undipara. That means, rather than anya bhava, rather than taking God to be something other than ourselves and having love for him as something other than ourselves, ananya bhava, when we have love for him as ourselves alone, he says ananya bhava, abanahamaham ananya bhava. That means ananya bhava in which he is I. That means in which we have understood or recognized that God is what is shining in our heart as I. So to having devotion to him with that understand that he's not something other than ourselves. He is that which is shining in our heart as I, and meditating on him accordingly. That is, as nothing other than ourselves, as I alone. That Bhagavan says, anatinam uttamam, it's best among all. And he says, ananya bhava me. And that is an emphasis that means it is certainly the best among all. When he says the best among all, that implies, in the context, implies the best among all practices of bhakti. It also means, in the context, it also means the best or most efficacious means to purify the mind, which is the ultimate aim of all spiritual practices, the purification of mind. All practices other than self-investigation are beneficial to the extent to which they purify the mind, but the mind will be perfectly pure only when it is eradicated, because the mind is itself an impurity. That is, the mind is the root and essence of the mind is ego, and ego is the false awareness, I am this body. So that itself is an impurity. What is pure is only I am. So to purify the mind perfectly, perfect purification of mind, chitta suddhi, can be achieved only by eradication of ego. When ego is eradicated, the mind is eradicated, because ego is the root and essence of the mind. So that is the ultimate aim. That's why in the next verse of Upadesha Undiyā, after saying this about that ananya bhava is best, in the next verse, verse 9, he goes on to say, bhava balatinal, that's by the strength of that bhava, that implies by the strength of that ananya bhava. Ananya bhava means meditating on God as not other than ourselves, in other words, self-attentiveness. So what he implies in verse 9 is, by the strength of that self-attentiveness, bhavana tita sabhava tu irutale, being in the state of being which transcends bhavana. Here bhavana implies any meditation that entails mental activity. In other words, attending to anything other than ourselves, that is mental activity, because it's a movement of our attention away from ourselves towards something else. So by the strength of this self-attentiveness, we come to the state of being which transcends mental activity, because attending to ourselves is not a mental activity. It is a subsidence or cessation of mental activity. So he says, by the strength of that self-attentiveness, being in the state of being, which transcends mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. So Bhagavan's path is the path of parabhakti, a path of the supreme devotion. The ultimate devotion is the path of self-investigation. So both these meanings, thinking of Arunachala as thinking of his name and form, or thinking of his Swarupa, which is our own Swarupa, both meanings are appropriate. According to the level we are at the moment. But as Bhagavan says, best of all is Ananya Bhava. So that is what we are moving towards. Even if we are still at the stage of Anya Bhava, that is moving us towards the Ananya Bhava, which is the true path that Bhagavan has shown us. So, but how do we think of Arunachala? As Bhagavan emphasizes here, it's Arunachala who makes us think of him. So in the case of some spiritual aspirants, Arunachala may draw their mind inwards to meditate on his Swarupa even before or even without ever making them think of his name and form. Whereas in the case of others, he may first make them think of his name and form. Why? Because making us think of his name and form is a very powerful and effective means by which he draws our mind inwards to face his Swarupa. As Bhagavan has clearly implied in verse 10 of Arunachala Paticam. I talked about this verse in when I was talking about the first verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai. This is a very important verse because Bhagavan shows here how the thought of the efficacy of thinking of Arunachala. So I'll just briefly read the verse. Read the an English translation of the verse. Bhagavan begins by saying, Patanam Purumai, I've seen a wonder. We Bali Kanta Parvatam, the magnetic hill that seizes or forcibly attracts the soul. And then that's the first sentence. Then he goes on to say, subduing the mischievous, in other words, the outward going mental activity of the soul who thinks of it even once. So if we even once think of Arunachala, and how do we think of him? He makes us think of him. So once he makes us think of him, he's starting a process. And that process begins subduing the mischievous activity of the mind. The mischievous activity of the mind is the outward going inclination of the mind, the outward going flow of the mind. So that he begins to subdue. And he pulls or drags or attracts that soul inwards to be what he describes as Tanadu Abhimukham. Tanadu Abhimukham means facing towards itself. In other words, facing towards Arunachala. Tanadu can also mean facing towards ourself. Both are mean the same because Arunachala is ourself. Arunachala is what's shining in our heart as eye. So he draws us, he attracts us inwards. So first he subdues the outward going momentum of the mind, and he begins to draw the mind inwards to face itself. And then he says, Oru Tanadu Abhimukham. Oru means one. It also means what is unique or peerless. So he's referring to Arunachala. The true nature of Arunachala is one. It is ekameva dvaitam, one only without a second. And it is unique and peerless. Why? Because it is that which is shining in our heart. It's that infinite pure awareness, but shines within the heart as eye. So having subduing the outward going tendency of the mind, drawing it within, he thereby makes it achala, like itself. He says, Ade tampol achalama sedu, making it motionless like itself. That's the name Arunachala. Achala means hill, but why Achala means hill? The root meaning, the etymological meaning of Achala, chala is movement. Achala is without movement. So a hill, because hills are motionless, they're called Achala. So Arunachala is the very embodiment of that stillness, which is our real nature. So that motionless form of the hill, that silent form of the hill, is an outward representation of our real nature, which is ever immutable, unchanging, unmoving, silent, shining always as I am. So he, by subduing our the outward-going momentum of our mind, by drawing the mind inwards, he makes it motionless like itself. And once he makes it motionless, the soul thereby becomes mature, ripe, and he says he accepts that sweet soul as bali. Bali means food that is offered in sacrifice. So the implication is, but by drawing us within and making us motionless like itself, Arunachala ripens us. And once we are ripened, once we are like a fully ripened fruit, then he will accept and swallow us. Now we are all still unripe fruit, so he's not going to, he's very, very partial. He only eats us when we are fully ripe. That means when we are fully willing to give ourselves wholly to him, when we surrender ourselves wholly to him, then only are we fully ripened and ready to be eaten by him. And then he says, Ich denn, that literally means, what is this? It implies, what a wonder is this? And then he ends this verse by saying, Karl, he's addressing us, O souls, Ulum adanil olie ib we koli arunamagiriye otu we min. That means, O souls, be saved, thinking of the great Aruna hill, the killer of the soul, who shines in the heart. Who shines in the heart means he's shining in the heart as our fundamental awareness of being, I am. And by drawing us inwards, he thereby kills us, he thereby swallows us. So this is the efficacy of thinking of the name and form of Arunachala. So we should never, even if we are more drawn to the Ananya Bhava, to taking Arunachala to be that which is shining in our heart as I, we should never underestimate the efficacy of thinking of his name and form. And what is true of the name and form of Arunachala is equally true of the name and form of Bhagavan, because Bhagavan Ramana is Arunachala in human form, and Arunachala is Bhagavan in hill form. They are one and the same Swarupa, and they are our Arun Swarupa. They are that which is shining in our heart as I. So thinking of his name and form is a very, very powerful and effective means by which he draws our mind inwards. So if we think of his name and form, it is because he has made us think of his name and form. And by making us think of his name and form, he thereby draws our mind inwards and makes us think of his true form, his Swarupa. So both taking it in either sense, both senses are appropriate. Therefore, whether Arunachala makes us think of him first by making us think of his name and form, whether he draws our mind inwards either by making us think of his name and form or by any other means, his ultimate aim is to draw our mind inwards to meditate on his Swarupa, because only when we do so will we sink into the innermost depth of our heart and thereby be devoured by him. Arunachala used the seeming mind, speech and body of Bhagavan, which he had taken complete charge of as his own, as Bhagavan is implied in the previous verse when he said, Arukavene Andane. That Andane means he took complete charge of Bhagavan as his own. So having taken complete charge of the mind, speech and body of Bhagavan as his own, he used that mind, speech and body to sing this Arunachala Akṣaramaṇamālai, a love song to himself, for the benefit of devotees at various stages of their spiritual development. So the meaning and implication of these verses can appropriately be interpreted at different levels and from different perspectives. And though certain levels and perspectives may appeal to us more than others, we should take care not to exclude any of them and to acknowledge the aptness and value of all of them. Therefore, if I seem to be explaining these verses more from the perspective of Ananya-bhava, this is not intended to exclude or underrate the value of viewing them from the Anya-bhava perspective, which obviously in Bhagavan's line, that has to be fully acknowledged and appreciated. I'm not the only one who is interpreting these verses more from the Ananya-bhava perspective. If you read Murugan's commentary on Akṣaramaṇamālai, it is very clear he is putting more emphasis on the Ananya-bhava perspective, likewise Sadhuvam. So, but that doesn't mean that they often, both of them often acknowledge how these verses can also be interpreted from a more Anya-bhava perspective. Both are appropriate. It all depends upon our on the level of our spiritual development. But we shouldn't think that Ananya-bhava is somehow lower. Bhagavan has said, we shouldn't think the Anya-bhava is lower. Bhagavan has said the Ananya-bhava is best among all. But that doesn't underrate the Anya-bhava. The Anya-bhava is also necessary. If we've come to an Anya-bhava now, it is because we've gone through Anya-bhava in previous lives. This is how we come to this path. This is how we are drawn to this path. The second sentence of this fifth verse, as I say, it's uṉai yēṉiṇaipittāy. Why did you make me think of you? This is significant for several reasons. Firstly, by saying this, Bhagavan implies that if we think of Arunachala, that is because he has made us think of him. We shouldn't think, oh, I have thought about him. He has made us think of him. If he didn't make us think of him, we would never think of him. Why? Because the natural inclination of the mind is to flow outwards, seeking happiness and satisfaction in things other than itself. So it will become inclined to turn back within to seek happiness and satisfaction in its own real nature, Atma-swarupa, only when it is drawn to do so by a power greater than itself, namely the power of grace, which is the infinite love that Arunachala has for us as himself. It is his love for us that sows in our heart the seed of love for him. So whatever little love we have for him is a very poor reflection of the infinite love that he has for us. So whatever little love we have for him is given only by him, because he is the source of all love. He is love itself. So we cannot love him without him sowing that seed of love in our heart, because all true love comes only from him. In fact, everything comes only from him, because he is the original source and substance of everything. Because he is our real nature. Therefore, our thinking of him is the effect of his grace working within us. Without his grace, we would not have even the slightest inclination to think of him, because we would be too preoccupied with our search for happiness and satisfaction in things other than ourselves. We seek happiness in other things because we wrongly believe that we cannot obtain happiness or satisfaction without such things. And we believe this because of our lack of viveka, our lack of clear judgment, discernment, or discrimination. As Bhagavan says, as Bhagavan explains in the 14th paragraph of Nana, in which he says, we think that we obtain happiness from external things because of our aviveka. Aviveka means the opposite of viveka. Viveka means clear judgment or discernment or discrimination, our lack of viveka. So the inner clarity by which we recognize that happiness doesn't lie in external things, it lies only within ourselves. That is the true viveka. Now he has given us a certain degree of viveka. So we have begun to understand that the unsatisfactory nature of all external things, but we are still not fully convinced that happiness doesn't lie outside, because if we were truly convinced that there was no happiness in external things, our mind wouldn't be going outwards towards external things. The very fact that our mind is still going outwards, that we are still concerned about anything other than ourselves, shows that we still don't yet have sufficient viveka. And the more we seek happiness in other things, the more our mind, our mind goes outwards under the sway of its Vishaya vasanas. The more we allow ourselves to be swayed by any particular Vishaya vasanas, the more those vasanas are strengthened. The less we allow ourselves to be swayed by them, the more they are weakened. So whatever strength our vasanas seem to have is strength that we have given them by allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. And the more we allow ourselves to be swayed by Vishaya vasanas, the stronger and denser they become. So the mind is clouded by that dense fog of its Vishaya vasanas. And the Vishaya vasanas are what rise in us as likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on. So long as our mind is clouded by likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on, it will lack the clarity to see that happiness doesn't lie in external things, it lies only within. And the more it is clouded, the more we consequently seek happiness in other things. So our lack of viveka is self-perpetuating, and therefore it cannot be rectified by anything other than by grace. So without grace, we wouldn't have even the least inclination to begin seeking happiness within ourselves. In other words, we wouldn't have come to this path if it wasn't for grace, because the nature of ego is to be always going outwards. It has to be a power greater than ego to draw it within. That power is grace, and grace manifests itself in our heart as the love to turn within. Grace is what shines within us as the clarity that is required to disperse and dispel the dense fog of Vishaya vasanas, and consequently to reveal the clear viveka that always exists in our heart, but remains hidden so long as it is covered by this dense fog. Grace has to draw our mind within. That's how grace works. Grace works by drawing our mind within. And this clarity called grace can come only from Arunachala, because Arunachala is the infinite light of pure awareness that is eternally shining in our heart as I am. So we need to bathe in this clarity by turning our attention within and immersing it in this light of awareness. So by turning our attention within, we are, so to speak, bathing and cleansing ourselves in the light of pure awareness, which is the light of grace. So the more we turn within, the more we are bathed in that light. The more we are bathed in that light, the more we have inclination to turn within. So the mind gains the love to turn within only by trying to turn within. This is why Bhagavan emphasized the practice of self-investigation so repeatedly and consistently. Without trying to turn our attention within, we cannot gain the clarity, but will give us the love to turn within more. So the practice is absolutely essential, according to Bhagavan. And this entire process of our spiritual development, it is driven primarily by grace. So long as our mind is racing outwards in search of happiness and satisfaction, we'll have no inclination to turn back within. So it is grace alone that can give us love to turn within. And it gives us this love by gradually dispersing the dense fog of our Vishaya vasanas, and thereby allowing the clarity of viveka to shine forth from within ourselves. So, as I say, the one reason why this sentence, why did you make me think of you? One reason it is so significant is because we need to understand, if we have thought of him, if we are attending to ourselves, it is because he has made us do so. And he makes us do so by giving us the love. So we try to do so more and more. So his grace isn't something, but grace doesn't work from outside. It works from within our heart. So grace works by drawing our mind within. So how can we cooperate with grace? By yielding ourselves to it, by surrendering ourselves to it, by willingly allowing grace to draw our attention within to face ourselves. A second reason why this sentence, uṉai yēṉiṉaipittāy, why did you make me think of you? A second reason why this is significant is implicit in the first reason. If our thinking of him had been a whim or fancy of our own mind, we might forget about him as soon as some other whim takes hold of us. That the mind is constantly fickle. One thought comes, we take interest in that. Then sometimes we lose interest in that, we latch on to some other thought. The mind is constantly taking interest in so many things. That is the nature of the mind. So if we had thought of Arunachala, if the thought of Arunachala had come by our own whim or fancy, we'd be interested in it for a while and quickly we'd lose interest and take interest in something else. That is the nature of the mind. So if it was not he who had made us think of him, after some time, we would forget about him. As soon as some other thought comes, we would forget and go off after some other thought. So any thought that originated from our mind would be fickle and unreliable. However, since it is he who made us think of him, our thought of him originates from him and not from us. So it has a power far greater than any thought that originates from us. And unlike other thoughts which originate from us, it will be unfailing in its effect. That is, since he made us think of him once, he will make us think of him again and again and again, and more deeply. So this thought of him will steadily increase in strength, depth, and intensity, thereby becoming firmly established and deeply rooted in our mind. In other words, having once drawn our mind back within to meditate on him in our heart, he will continue drawing it back to him, no matter how many times it wanders away outside. And he will not stop doing so till he has drawn it so deep within that it can never rise and come out again. In other words, until it is destroyed, he will not stop drawing it back within again and again and again. To the extent to which he draws our attention back within, we thereby taste the deep peace and joy of meditating on him in our heart as I. And the more we taste this peace and joy, the more willingly we will submit ourselves to his inward pulling attraction, thereby allowing him to draw us deeper and deeper within. In other words, the more he draws our mind within to meditate on him, the more he thereby nurtures in our heart the love to think of nothing other than him. So fixing our mind on him in our heart will be found to be happening more and more naturally, effortlessly, and uninterruptedly. A third reason why this sentence, uṉai yēṉiṉaipittāy, why did you make me think of you, is significant, is that in this context, it implies that by making us think of him, Arunachala has implicitly undertaken an obligation and made a binding commitment to us, namely that he will never reject or abandon us, but will unfailingly take complete charge of us. That is, complete control of us, complete care of us, which he can do perfectly only by eradicating ego and thereby revealing that he and we are always mutru abhinam, as he says in verse 2, completely non-different or indivisible, inseparable. Why is this implication here? Because Bhagavan asked this question, he starts by saying, escape this blame. In other words, that escape this blame means do not abandon me. So when he immediately follows that by asking, why did you make me think of you? It implies that he made us think of him with an intention to save us. Therefore, he will not abandon us. That is the implication. So Arunachala, by making us think of him, Arunachala has made a commitment to us, and we must hold him to his commitment. Of course, he will never fail in his commitment, but by holding him to his commitment, we are making ourselves more and more willing to cooperate with the grace that he is working in our heart. So by asking this rhetorical question, immediately after saying that Arunachala should escape the blame of rejecting or abandoning the devotee after taking charge of him, he implies that the reason he made him think of him was in order to thereby take complete charge of him. All these implications of this second sentence are further confirmed in the next sentence, the third and last sentence of this verse, yiṇiyār viḍuvā, which means who will leave. But it can also be interpreted as now who can leave. Ini is an adverb that means now or hereafter or henceforth. Ya means who. It's an interrogative pronoun. And viḍuvā is a third person plural or honorific singular form of the verb vidu, which means to leave or to let go. So ya viḍuvā means who will let go. Who will leave or who will let go, implying which of us will or can leave or let go of the other. In other words, when Bhagavan asks, now who can leave, he implies, you cannot leave me, I cannot leave you. You cannot let go of me, I cannot let go of you. Since Arunachala is what we always actually are, in other words, our real nature, Atma-swarupa, namely our fundamental awareness, I am, he can never leave us, and we can never leave him. We cannot leave ourselves. So since he is ourself, what we actually are, we cannot leave him, he cannot leave us. Moreover, by making us think of him, he has committed himself to taking complete charge of us without ever rejecting or abandoning us. So now he has undertaken this task, he can never henceforth let go of us. Because of the persistently outgoing nature of our mind, we may seem to let go of him repeatedly. But no matter how often we may allow ourselves to attend to other things under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas, he will repeatedly draw our attention back within to face himself. So we cannot let go of him without being unfailingly drawn back to him sooner or later. And eventually, he will draw us so deep within, but we will lose ourselves entirely and forever in him. After which we will never be able to rise and again to let go of him or leave him, even for a moment. As he implies in verse 71 of Akṣaramaṇamālai. What he says in 71 is, this is a very, well, like all these verses are so beautiful. Paitanam vidā pei i-p-paṛi henceforth payan akine en Arunachala. That means Arunachala, what a wonder. It literally means grasping as an unleaving demon, so that the demon nature leaves, you made me a demoniac. What that implies is, Arunachala, what a wonder. Grasping or seizing or possessing me as an unleaving demon. That is a demon or ghost or fiend or evil spirit that will never let go of me. So that my hitherto unleaving demon nature, namely ego, leaves me, you made me a demoniac, someone who is possessed by the demon-like madness of love for you. So Arunachala is the if you've got demons, how to get rid of a small demon? You need, only a big demon can get rid of a small demon. So this ego is a small demon. The great demon of grace, of Arunachala, he has taken possession of us as a demon, and he will not let go of us. So this is Bhagavan described from these verses, from the way he's describing Arunachala as an unleaving demon. We can understand the love he has for Arunachala. Only when there's great love can you when there's great love and great familiarity, can you call your beloved an unleaving demon. If it was not a very close and intimate relationship, if you're just beginning a relationship with someone and you call them a demon, you're an unleaving demon if you say they're going to take offense. But because Bhagavan is so close to Arunachala, he's able to use such language. He's able to call Arunachala an unleaving demon. And Arunachala, of course, understands what Bhagavan means by that. Of course, Arunachala is not a demon, but like a demon, he has possessed us and he will not leave us. And by his possessing us, he will drive away this small demon called ego. So having possessed us as an unleaving demon, so that our demon nature, in other words, ego leaves us, he has made us demoniac, one who is possessed by the demon-like madness of love for him. So it's so beautifully expressed. So long as we rise and stand as ego, our mind wanders about the world like a hungry demon, trying to seize iotas of happiness and satisfaction trying to squeeze iotas of happiness and satisfaction out of numerous experiences. But as soon as Arunachala makes us think of him, we are possessed by a far more powerful demon in the form of his grace, which will never release us from its hold, but will instead gradually intoxicate us with ever-increasing love for him, thereby binding us to itself more and more firmly until it eventually devours us entirely. Therefore, now that he has made us think of him, we can never henceforth leave him, and he will never leave or forsake us. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaaya.